And so, just a nice static seat where you feel like you can be grounded. And then from that sensation of grounding, we'll just start to feel into the physical expansion and contraction within the breath. Just noting how those inhales and those exhales change, impact your physicality. Noting how you can shift, how you can control the rate or the depth, the intensity of your breath to better impact the shifts within the physicality. And continually tweaking and adjusting to find a breath that most benefits you this morning. And let's just give ourselves about 30 more seconds here. When it feels appropriate for you, allowing the eyes to open if they are closed. And let's extend our legs out in front of us. So just kind of a little brief forward fold, just to address the posterior chain. Knees can be incredibly bent. So don't worry about where the knee position is. Just take yourself forward into a fold that feels good. And legs can be extended, right? But just finding something that feels good, not something that feels straining here. This really is just about kind of waking up, saying hello to that backside musculature chain. And maybe on that note, right, if having the legs extended doesn't feel good and having the bottoms of the feet together feels better, or another shape feels better, feel free to do that. It's really just a little hello to that posterior chain. And we'll give ourselves just about 40 more seconds here. Maybe your last cycle of breath. And then as it feels appropriate, we'll walk ourselves up into a nice little staff and transition to hands and knees tabletop. As we transition, before we get too comfy, let's connect with our blanket towel prop. And we're just gonna, one of those, and we're just gonna roll that. So from shelf to a nice little log. And we'll place that back end-ish of our mat. And then as you set up in tabletop, we're gonna have the ankles lifted on this blanket roll. And then just create your traditional alignment, traditional tabletop. Think about that neutrality of the spine. As you take your next exhale out, let's push the middle of the back, round the spine, tuck the chin, tuck the tailbone. Get into this big cat shape. And then let's release back to neutral, and we'll sink back into this little modified child's pose. And so here, I'm always trying to find ways to bring newness into this practice. If this feels uncomfortable on the knees, pull the blanket out and do a traditional version of child's pose. What we're hoping to do here is just increase the elevation of the hips and get a little more of that lumbar expansion capacity from our child's pose shape. Just by elevating the hips, we end up with a more neutral alignment in our back. But again, if this feels uncomfortable on the knees, pull the prop out and go to a traditional shape. This can be a good opportunity to settle back into that breath, right? If you've lost that breath that you've identified as the most beneficial, as we settle into this shape, this might be a great opportunity to redefine or reconnect with that. And then let's pull ourselves forward to hands and knees tabletop. We'll slide that prop off of our mat. And then inhale in. As you inhale in, drop the belly, lift the tailbone, lift the chin. Really working to craft that belly drop to get that anterior expansiveness. And then we'll come back to neutral and sink back into a traditional child's pose. And as you settle back into this more traditional shape, allow for a little compare and contrast, right? How that little elevation impacted the way that the entire system responds to this child's pose shape. And there's such a variance, right? It's a 4-inch ankle lift, maybe less than 4 inches when we compress down. But it really does have a dramatic impact. It just shows you how small movements can really impact the way our body responds. So we're just going to give ourselves 40 more seconds here. And then as it feels appropriate for you, we'll bring ourselves back into tabletop and extend our legs out in front of us once again for staff. I'm going to offer two options here. So looking to find a forward fold where we can relax once again. You can do the knees bent. You can do arms underneath the thighs. You can also bring your props and really fold and stack them in a way where they can be supportive. But try to find something where you feel like you can rest into it. And I will offer once again that if staff traditional seated forward fold doesn't provide a place where you can rest, play with leg positioning, right? So maybe we go into a full bottoms of the feet together butterfly with some blanket stacks. But something where you are folding in the forward direction and you're at ease. Those are our two requirements here. Taking a forward fold and finding ease. And just really softening into this. Looking for a little bit more depth, right? We've kind of greeted the posterior chain, and then we've played with some expansion of the structure in our child's pose sequence. And now we're looking to elongate that musculature to kind of match the structural expansion that we've already found. Yeah, beautiful shape choices. And so there's this village next to this enchanted forest. And this forest is not enchanted in the way that might first come to mind. Haunted might be a better descriptor. This forest is known as the Whispering Forest because from time to time, these whispers will be heard by the villagers. This and whenever these whispers are heard, bad things tend to happen. It's like they're a bad omen for the villagers. Remember that we can move and adjust, that there's nothing that is preventing us from shifting our body into more ease here, shifting our body into a more receptive space here, right? First responsibility is a forward fold. Second responsibility is to feel supported. And so in the recent weeks, the whispers from this forest have been becoming more frequent, have been becoming louder. They feel like they are becoming more aggressive. Last 60 seconds here. And when it feels appropriate, we'll walk ourselves up into a nice seat. Let's take our blankets if we have them. And from shelf fold, just go to a hot dog fold. And that's going to be both of them. So shelf fold, hot dog fold, both of them. On the first blanket, we're going to place that behind us, but we're going to give enough room that we can kind of roll the top. It's probably not going to stay for us, but maybe it will, right? We're going to roll that top. And then on our second blanket, we'll just place that right on top of that. Actually, let's take the second blanket and make it a little longer. So we'll go from shelf fold to towel length, then go hot dog fold, and that'll give us just a little bit more space to play with. So you end up with kind of a double shelf here. Tailbone on the mat, lay yourself down, looking for this upper or the second shelf to be kind of right at the thoracic joint. And then as you land, you can kind of play with that roll on the bottom blanket to get a head elevation and really trying to find a space where you feel relatively neutral through the sternum, where the head is not forced to roll back and it's not tucking down into the sternum. And then legs can be anywhere here. They can be extended, they can be bottoms of the feet together, they can be out wide. Anything that feels the most supportive will work. And just find a place where your palms can rest facing towards the ceiling or sky. And then settle back into your breath of ease, or most beneficial breath that you found. Making those prop adjustments so that your body feels really held and supported here, so that you can note that second shelf right at the thoracic joint, the union between the lumbar and the thoracic, but that it's not painful for sure. I would even say it's not uncomfortable. It's just noticeable. And if it is feeling uncomfortable, certainly if it's feeling painful, make those tweaks and adjustments in your position, or adjust the props by removing or altering. Wanting to find our way into a shape where we're held and supported here. So as these whispers grow louder, grow more intense, grow more noticeable in the village, the level of stress and anxiety starts to rise because they know something bad is coming. And then it does. It is this true calamity within the village. people are falling sick and people are passing away. And the villagers get together and they go ask this old sage, lives at the edge of town. Seems like he's always been there. They ask him if it's true that the forest is causing their problems. And the sage acknowledges that it is true. After the whispers, there will be problems in the village. It's not a superstition. It's not a coincidence. The two are directly tied. And so that night, some of the healthy villagers get together. They meet in the middle of the town. And they start building torches, wrapping sticks with this cotton like material at the end, and then wrapping that cotton like material with these cotton strips so that it is tightly bound. And then they dip these torches' heads, like the head of the torch, into this flammable sap. And they're all building as many of these torches as they can. When the old sage wanders into this little production line and he asks them what they're doing, they say they're building torches. They're going to go burn down the forest. And the old sage looks at them and he says, I wouldn't do that. And they say, why? And he says, because the answer to your problems lies within the forest. Somebody pipes up and says, well, then why don't you go into the forest and solve our problems, old man? And the sage laughs and he says, well, because I'm not that mobile, I'm not that agile. Certainly, there is someone better suited for movement through the forest than I. And because everyone's terrified of this whispering forest, no one volunteers to go in. And it's late at night. But for some reason, this little girl is out wandering the street. She's heard this entire conversation and she says, I volunteer. And the group of healthy villagers immediately dismisses the idea of sending this little girl alone out into this forest. But the sage says, no, she's volunteered. That's now her responsibility. Letting your exhale breath really be the guide here so that your body can just melt around and over this prop. Making sure your head and neck are not shifting so that the breath passageway is interrupted at all. Staying conscious and aware of that throat angle. We're going to give ourselves about 90 more seconds here in this little extended supported spinal adjustment. And so this sage takes this little girl and he starts giving her directions to the middle of the forest. And he tells her what she'll need to do to get there. And then in the middle of the night, this little girl sets off into the Whispering Forest, a forest that her entire village is terrified of. And as she disappears from view of the village, she starts to hear a constant stream of these whispers. The deeper she walks in, the more clarity she gets. She starts to hear real words from time to time. When it feels appropriate for you, let's bring our knees into a bent position. So kneecaps point towards the ceiling if they're not already. Just give yourself a moment to settle and integrate, and then we'll let the knees fall to one side or the other, whatever side feels most appropriate. And from this side, we're just going to take our bottom blanket, the one that is just shelf fold, hot dog fold, and then fold that in half so that it's block style. And we'll place that in between the knees. So whichever direction we fell, that comes into the knees. The other blanket can kind of get folded up hot dog style and come back underneath the head. And then we're going to roll our torso, but keep the twists. And so we're rolling away from the legs here, shoulders finding their way to anchor. If you can't get that opposite shoulder to anchor, you can adjust your blanket so that it supports maybe the head and shoulder, or maybe just the shoulder for a little more ease. But looking to create a space where we're rolling away from the anchored knees, kind of backdooring our way into this twist. And so as this little girl continues into this forest, and she's now able to pull out from the whispers words that she can understand. And the deeper she travels into the forest, the more clearly she can hear these words. She starts to hear little fragments of sentences. And then she starts to hear full sentences that sound very familiar. And then she starts to recognize that the whispers she's hearing most clearly are her own internal thoughts, her worries, her fears, her frustrations. And the deeper she gets into the forest, the more her internal dialogue is reflected back to her through the whispers of the forest. The more clearly, the more impactfully, these words are whispered to her. Last about 60 seconds here on this first side. Checking in with your respiration, ensuring that you are utilizing a breath cycle that is the most beneficial for you. And then eventually we'll bring our knees to neutral. And then we're going to roll all the way to the second side. So coming onto that side first, really making sure that the hips are stacked, and then expanding away from that hip stack. Again, backdooring our way into this twist. Finding a position where our body feels ease and support. And then from the physical ease and support, making our way into that ease of respiration. And now, with her own thoughts clearly being whispered at her from this whispering forest, she starts to hear other voices she recognizes. She starts to hear members of her village. And she starts to recognize that their thoughts, their worries, their fears, their frustrations are also being whispered to her. And the closer she gets towards the center of the forest, the more madness in all of these whispers being as shouted as a whisper can be at her. It becomes this cacophony of thoughts being forced upon her. And then she sees this stone circle. And at the center of the stone circle, there's this perfectly clear pool of water. And she steps inside this stone circle towards the water, and instantaneously, all of those voices shut off. And she's left with this perfectly still, perfectly silent place. Almost like this bubble of serenity right in the middle of this forest. We're allowing ourselves the ability to respond, to adjust, so that we are more at ease in this twist. We'll give ourselves about 60 more seconds here on this second side. Last breath here. And then we'll bring our knees back to neutral. And we'll take this blanket from in between the thighs. And let's go back to shelf fold and then go hamburger fold from there. So we end up with, a little hamburger folded blanket. We're going to do the same thing with our second blanket, second towel, roughly from a shelf fold shape to a hamburger fold shape. And then take the fold side and reverse those so that you have, I put that off camera, an open side and a fold side and an open side and a fold side. And basically, you're just looking to create a nice, flat, dense block-like shape. And then we are going to push down into the toe mounds and heels, lift ourselves high enough to slide this prop underneath us. The nice thing about this is we should have a pretty equivalent amount of density left to right. But if you don't feel like that's true, adjust left or right on the prop itself until you find an area that has a little bit more equivalent density. And then we're just going to relax into this. The lower we can get the prop, the better. So the less blanket touching the lumbar, the better. At the same time, we kind of have to compensate with our own geometry and our own density of our props to really find the Goldilocks spot. And then we're just arms in cactus is probably ideal, but anything that feels relaxing here. There's a little bit of an extra elevation in our back bend. So note that if it does feel like it's too much, you can always slide one or both of those props out. And so in this bubble of perfect stillness, of perfect silence, the scroll looks at this perfectly clear water and almost as if she is compelled by a force outside of her. She sits down and she closes her eyes. And she is immediately in this meditative state. She is immediately in this place where she is at once experiencing nothingness and everythingness. And those concepts are connected and blended. And after some time, she opens her eyes and she re experiences this world around her, this perfect little bubble of stillness, of absolute silence, of tranquility. And she looks down into this perfectly clear pool of water that she is seated next to, and she expects to see her reflection, but she doesn't. She sees her community, her village, consciously cooperating, overcoming this calamity that's fallen upon them. Last 90 seconds here. And she gets up and she walks to the edge of this stone circle. And she looks out into the whispering forest. And she's scared. Right? She knows when she takes that step back across this threshold, she's going to be hit with this cacophonous wave of chaotic voices. Hers, the most loud among them. And yet she also knows she has to go back. Last 20 seconds here. When it feels appropriate for you, we'll press down into the toe mounds and heels, lift our belt line high enough to slide our props out of the way. You won't need those again, but you may want them for Shavasana, releasing the tailbone down to the mat and feeling how the lumbar responds as it comes all the way down to this neutrality. Keeping the lumbar anchored. So your low back is the focus here. Draw the thighs in towards the rib cage, towards the torso, and give yourself a nice little squeeze. Back of the head stays glued to the mat. And then let's release our feet back down to the mat and let the knees start to dynamically sway here. A final little exploration of movement and rotation capacity. maybe one more time in either direction. And then when it feels appropriate for you, let's bring our knees back to neutral, and we'll let the bottoms of the feet come together and the knees fall out wide. As she does take this step across the threshold, she's surprised by something. Not that there are no whisperers, but that her own voice, the voice she was hearing most loudly and most clearly, is completely missing from the whispers of the forest. And as she walks back towards the village, the voices that she hears grow more distant until they are at the edge of the forest, just those hushed. And we'll bring our knees back to neutral. And then let both knees fall over towards the right. Over the course of the next month, one by one, she leads her fellow villagers to the center of this forest. She guides them into this bubble of stillness next to this crystal clear, perfectly still pool of water. And they sit and they connect with that stillness, with that consciousness. And when they leave the bubble, we'll inhale our knees to neutral. And we'll exhale the knees over to the second side, the left side. When they leave the bubble, their voices too are erased from the symphony of whispers. And eventually, after every villager has been guided, the whispering forest is quiet, is perfectly still for the first time in anyone's memory. And we'll inhale our knees back to neutral. And as we come into this space, ask yourself if there's anything your body might want, need, or benefit from before Shavasana. And if there is, offer that to yourself now. And if you're ready for some stillness, let's find our way into a shape where we can fully appreciate that. And as you lay connected here to your breath, for just a moment, I want you to visualize your lungs as you receive that inhale. And visualize your lungs as you completely exhale. And then I will offer this reminder that it is almost a certainty that you are only visualizing half of your lungs. All right, the breathing apparatus that is your lungs is endogenous and exogenous in that you are constantly exchanging breath with the vegetative life on the planet. So as you visualize your lungs, can you visualize that second half as well? As you feel into your breath and as you either have or are experiencing that awareness of the duality of breath, the internal and the external component of our breath. Give yourself a very brief opportunity to imagine the impact of holding that much consciousness in every single breath. If every single being was that aware every single breath, how differently our world would play out. And then let's start to bring some movement to our fingers and our toes. Into our wrists and our ankles, elbows and our knees, our shoulders and our hips, neck and head, jaw, eyes, tongue. Eventually, the entirety of the body will start to move and we'll reestablish the seat. Spine tall, breath fluid, eyes close. And when it feels appropriate, let's inhale our hands together, heart center. Over the course of the next 7 days, can you tap in and remind yourself that if you're unhappy with the state of things, there is one difficult but simple solution, and see how that impacts your experience. Thank you so much for being a part of this morning's practice and for being you. Namaste. Happy Sunday, guys. Appreciate the heck out of you being here. I spend a lot of time thinking about how we can make things better. And I really think that there is only one choice, and it is more consciousness. So go spread everything that you are with everyone around you. And I'll see you soon. Love the heck out of you. Have a beautiful rest of your day. Mwah.